The alarm blared deep within Yucca Mountain, so loud it felt like my eardrums were about to burst. Red signal lights flashed chaotically underground, casting the walls in alternating light and shadow. I had been thrown to the ground by a blast of air, my face pressed hard against the icy floor, unable to get up. Look at that lead door in my line of sight. It's a half-meter-thick blast door. Normally, it wouldn't budge without 6 strong men pushing together. But now, it's twisting like a crumpled piece of scrap paper. Something is wedged in the door crack. It has 4 thick arms, each thicker than my waist. Its claws dig deep into the alloy plating steel plating, the kind we use to block radiation. The sound of its claws scraping across is unbearable, like someone grinding a metal brush against teeth, making my own ache. That thing doesn't even notice me. Its 4 hands claw wildly at the crack, tearing a gash in the half-meter-thick metal. It turns its head and spots the large alarm hanging by the door. It reaches out a claw and gives it a light squeeze. The alarm shatters, parts scattering everywhere as easily as crushing a rotten fruit. My hands are trembling. I try to reach for the gun at my waist, but I can't move. Every time that thing shifts, the ground shakes. It's torn off a huge chunk of the wall, exposing the concrete beneath. It carries a strange smell, bitter and acrid, like burnt rubber or the sour stench of spoiled summer water. I stare at its back. 4 bone spikes like withered tree trunks jut out from its spine, sharp and menacing. It's still straining, and the door groans and creaks, the metal plate warping under immense force, slowly peeling outward. It keeps clawing, keeps pulling, tearing an even larger gash in the metal. I can only lie here. This place is freezing cold. My breath fogs in the air, clouding my vision. I wipe my eyes hard and see the thing turn around. Its face has several holes, and light shines through them, staring at me like abysses from the depths of the earth. Its strength is terrifying now. This door can't hold it back, not at all. It's slowly squeezing itself in, every bone creaking, the sound of metal deforming echoing through the narrow corridor. Our job used to be simple. Every day, we guarded the steel drums shipped from all over the country, stacking them in the storage rooms deep inside Yucca Mountain. It was always chilly here, the air thick with the smell of dust. After a while, your mind just settled into the cycle of moving, stacking, and recording. No one bothered to talk much working here, made life feel as still as stagnant water, until those strange marks appeared. I stared at one of the drums for a long time. The marks were circular, one ring inside another, as if something had drilled into it or scraped circles into the metal shell with something sharp. The scratches were deep, unsettling to look at. I joked with the others that it was just rats sharpening their teeth, but those marks had a strange, deliberate pattern to them, nothing like random damage. Then the warehouse fans started acting up. They usually hummed, a sound you got used to, but a few days ago, they began making a metallic clanging noise. It was like someone had thrown a nail into the blades. Each rotation brought a clatter. The sound echoed through the empty corridors, growing faster and faster, unsettling everyone. I followed the noise, but the walls were hollow. The knocking seemed to come from the other side, each strike hitting right at the core of my nerves. I led the team toward the core area. Everyone gripped their guns tightly, muzzles aimed down the dimly lit hallway, not daring to breathe too loudly. We disturbed the dust on the floor, but in the mess, I spotted a trail of wet footprints. The liquid left behind was sticky, like industrial glue, not yet dry, and reeked of burnt wires stinging my nose. We followed the footprints forward. The gravity-locked door at the end of the corridor was already destroyed. The lock core had been ripped right out, its parts shattered and scattered everywhere. Rounding the corner, I saw steel beams on the wall bent into an exaggerated curve. These were several centimeter-thick steel plates, twisted out of shape by something with brute force. I moved closer to look. The dent left behind was exactly the size of an adult's fist, but strangely, the imprint inside clearly showed 4 knuckles. The corridor was eerily quiet. Aside from the sound of our boots on the metal floor, only the smell of something burnt lingered in the air, as if something invisible had just crawled through here. All the way here, I hadn't seen any monsters, but every crack on the walls, every violently bent metal frame, told me that whatever was hiding here possessed terrifying strength. I touched the wall. The metal was polished smooth and still warm, as if something massive had just brushed past it. I glanced at my teammates. Everyone was whispering warnings to each other, but caution was useless here. Aside from the signs of destruction, we couldn't grasp anything. I looked toward the depths of the corridor. A sense of unease coiled around my heart like a snake. I felt we were already as close to that monster as we could possibly be. The fight erupted suddenly right there. The thing was crouching with its back to us, motionless like a small hill. Its back bore 4 large bone spikes, each dull gray and covered in rust-like spots. I was about 10 meters away from it, my palms sweaty, fingers stiff and tense around the gun grip. Just as I took half a step forward, one of the bone spikes on its back twitched, emitting a dry, cracking sound like splintering wood. Without thinking, even before I could shout, my finger pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash lit up the dim corridor with a blinding glare, flames flickering from the barrel. I watched as bullets struck its back one after another. The sound was bizarre. I expected bullets to sink into flesh, or at least produce a dull thud. But what I heard was like a group of people hammering an anvil simultaneously. Bang, 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 sharp, loud and ringing, making my eardrums buzz. The bullets didn't even leave a scratch on it. Instead, they ricocheted wildly. Stray rounds zipped through the corridor, striking the metal walls and sparking in several places. The thing didn't move, but the bullets left the walls pockmarked with small, round holes. I kept firing, the gunstock slamming painfully into my shoulder, but I couldn't stop. The smell of gunpowder, burnt wiring, and the acrid stench of struck metal all mixed together, making me want to vomit. It turned around. Its movement was terrifyingly fast, without any of the sluggishness you'd expect from a hulking monster. Its waist twisted into an exaggerated angle in that instant, all 4 arms swinging back. I saw its face clearly, no eyes, just a few sunken pits still steaming with heat. The 4 bone spikes on its back continued to tremble, as if excited or breathing. I tried to retreat, but the floor was too slippery, covered in a sticky fluid. Before I could step back, one of its hands swung toward me. The motion was as fast as a gray shadow. A teammate beside me raised a shield in front of himself. The thing's palm slammed directly into the shield with a loud bang. The shield was made of specially reinforced, thickened plating. Yet under that single blow, it dented inward like a cookie. My teammate was thrown back by the force, shield and all, crashing heavily into the steel beam overhead. The beam emitted a teeth-grinding sound of metal deformation, and the entire corridor's framework shook. Rubble and metal parts rained down, pelting us all. I refused to give up and fired another shot at its leg. The bullet struck its knee, where a grayish-white hardened mass grew. The bullet simply ricocheted into the ground, drilling a large hole in the concrete. It felt no pain, or perhaps it simply didn't care about such trivial things. It lifted its massive foot and stomped hard on the corridor's support column. I heard the sound of metal being compressed and twisted apart, clear and distinct, one crunch after another, as if it were slowly dismantling the entire warehouse. We backed away, our boots scraping against the slick liquid with a grating sound. I could feel the corridor walls trembling. With a casual swipe of its hand, it flattened a nearby equipment cabinet, tearing out the wires inside, which crackled and sparked. It advanced step by step, each footfall leaving a deep dent in the floor. Its 4 arms flailed wildly, plucking light fixtures from the walls like snapping beans, crushing them effortlessly in its grasp. I was forced under a ventilation shaft and quickly looked up. The cover above was shaking, ready to give way. The creature swung its arm again, tearing a massive gash through a reinforced steel wall blocking its path. It plunged its hand into the steel as if grabbing a sheet of paper and ripped it apart with brute force. The sound was deafening, like two giant sheets of sandpaper grinding together or heavy machinery tearing through fabric. The torn edges of the steel were sharp as blades, but it paid no mind, tossing the mangled sheet aside and sending another violent tremor through the floor. I tried to climb into the ventilation duct, but the thing was too fast. It raised its arm and swept toward us again. This time, its claw caught on my tactical vest strap, hurling me against the opposite wall. My back slammed into a steel beam, the pain knocking the breath out of me. I watched it continue forward, each step damaging the structure around us. Metal chunks from the overhead blast-proof layer rained down, clattering sharply against our helmets. I scrambled to my feet, still unsteady, when the creature grabbed a discarded piece of equipment from the floor and hurled it at us like a ball. The object weighed at least 200 pounds, smashing into the wall and leaving a gaping hole. The corridor lights flickered wildly, casting the monster's elongated, distorted shadow across the walls, making it seem as if multiple creatures surrounded us. We had no choice but to retreat further. Bullets had no effect on it, only causing metal fragments to fly and injure us. I spotted an emergency door along the side of the corridor and made a dash for it. The liquid underfoot grew thicker, making every step treacherous. I glanced back. The creature was still charging forward, all four arms digging into the floor to propel itself with terrifying force, tearing up the floor tiles as it moved. One of our crew, thrown aside earlier, struggled to get up, pinned under a twisted protective panel, his hands gripping a nearby pipe. The monster approached him, casually flipping over a heavy section of flooring with its foot. I gritted my teeth and sprinted toward the door, the sound of metal being violently twisted growing louder behind me. It moved like a demolition crew, tearing through walls, steel beams, and equipment. Nothing could stand in its way. It charged recklessly, indifferent to its surroundings or our destination, driven purely by destruction, intent on tearing the entire space apart. I finally crashed through the emergency door, stumbling into the adjacent monitoring room. Before I could lock it, the creature's hand forced its way through the gap. Its claws scraped against the door frame, producing a maddening screech. I watched as the frame twisted, and a finger-width hole appeared in the steel door, which it slowly widened, tearing the metal apart. The sound of rending steel felt like a knife, slicing through my nerves with every second. Leaning against a desk, I aimed my gun at the door, knowing bullets couldn't penetrate it or stop the clawing hand. The surrounding monitor screens flickered, reflecting the shadow of its four arms as they scraped relentlessly against the door, a methodical, brutal destruction that showed no sign of stopping. The lock let out a final groan, the entire door shuddering, ready to give way at any moment. Then the door stopped. The grating sound of claws scraping against metal vanished abruptly. The corridor fell dead silent, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in the cramped monitoring room. My hands trembled as I gripped the gun, my palms slick with sweat. I leaned against the corner, staring at the deformed metal door, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. After a long moment, there was still no movement outside. Holding my breath, I slowly peered through the torn hole in the door. The creature was crouched in the middle of the corridor, its posture strangely contorted. It had drawn all four arms beneath its body, resembling a massive, crumpled mass of flesh. It no longer paid us any mind, instead hunkering down beside a cluster of undamaged radiation barrels. I saw its fingers moving. Those long nails scraped back and forth on the barrel lid, agonizingly slow, over and over. The metal of the lid had been gouged into several small holes, the edges curled back to reveal the gray filler inside. It scraped with meticulous care, like someone picking ripe fruit. The silence around was so deep I could hear the faint, unnerving sound of the metal plate deforming under pressure. A tiny noise that set my nerves on edge. I let out a slight sigh of relief, thinking it was either full or had lost interest in us. But when I looked down, I found my boots stuck to the floor. A thin layer of pale purple liquid coated the ground. I tried to move my foot, and a sticky, pulling sound came from between my boot sole and the floor, like stepping on wet glue. The liquid was heating up, emitting faint wisps of white steam that softened the concrete until it began to sag like mud. I looked up at the creature again. After prying open the barrel lid, it didn't rush to eat. Instead, it reached inside, sifting through the heavy metal blocks. Its movements were gentle now, lacking the earlier brute force. It paused now and then, bringing iron shavings to its mouth to sniff, a low, gurgling rumble echoing in its throat like distant thunder from underground. The corridor's ventilation fans had long since broken down, yet a heavier smell of burning seeped in from somewhere, drifting through the door crack into the monitoring room and stinging my eyes. I noticed the purple mucus on the floor seeping into the walls through cracks. Where it touched the wiring, the insulation softened and bubbled, exposing the tangled circuits beneath. This place was wrong. Even with the creature crouching motionless now, the dead silence felt even more unbearable. The faint sounds of bending metal grew more frequent. I watched the spot where it squatted. The floor beneath it had already begun to sag under its weight, as if something were slowly hollowing it out from below. It was still busy tearing open the barrels, each one emitting a sharp, splitting sound, like a knife slowly slicing through metal. I stood there watching, legs numb, too afraid to move. Every slight motion it made was weakening the structure of this space. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling, under the influence of its unknown mucus and constant pressure, were slowly growing fragile. I felt trapped in a cage that was softening around me, with that monster outside guarding a pile of dangerous materials, waiting to tear this place apart. Thinking it had stopped to rest was foolish. The creature suddenly stood up, all four arms spread wide, bracing against the corridor walls. Its body expanded outward, the four bony spines on its back driving into the concrete ceiling with a series of dull, cracking sounds. Its rows of sharp teeth clacked together rhythmically, like a typewriter frantically tapping away. It shoved its hands back into the gap in the half-meter-thick lead door. This time, instead of clawing randomly, it wedged all four hands into the four corners of the opening and pulled evenly. The door's once solid frame began to glow a dull red, the color of overheated metal, spreading across the surface as if a fire burned behind it. The edges of the lead door deformed like candle wax softened by flame, dripping gray molten metal. With one powerful yank, it tore the half-meter-thick lead door straight out of its tracks. The ear-splitting shriek of tearing metal echoed through the hall, pounding in my head. It tossed the door aside like a rag, and it crashed to the floor, cracking the concrete. Now it stood in the doorway, the mangled nuclear waste barrels behind it, the uncleared corridor ahead. It grabbed the entire stack of iron barrels piled at the base. They were stacked 3 meters high, each one incredibly heavy. It tossed them into the air like building blocks. I watched as the multi-ton barrels tumbled through the air, its four hands moving in a blur, catching them like a juggler. Each barrel it caught went straight to its mouth. Its jaw stretched wide, revealing rows of interlocking saw-like teeth. Crunch! The thick, specialized steel drum lid shattered in its mouth like a crispy noodle snack. It chewed with immense force, the sharp, clear sound of metal fracturing echoing through the quiet hallway over and over. As it chewed, it spewed sparks, a blinding, bright blue that fell to the floor, burning small, smoking holes into the concrete. In its mouth, these metal drums were like soggy biscuits, bitten open, crushed, and then forcibly swallowed. It kept eating, its movements never ceasing. With each drum swallowed, its body swelled slightly, and a purple liquid seeped from every pore of its skin, sizzling as it scorched the surrounding floor. The purple liquid spread like a tide, creeping up the walls along the corners. The fireproof coating on the walls dissolved in the fluid, exposing the bare steel reinforcement inside, which instantly took on a sickly green hue upon contact. I watched as it reached out again, gripping the load-bearing steel beam in the corridor ceiling. The beam was as thick as a wrist, still attached to ventilation pipes. Wrapping all four of its limbs around it, the creature arched its body backward, the tremendous force wrenching the entire beam from the wall. The ceiling began to collapse, large chunks of stone and tangled wires raining down, striking the monster's back with dull thuds. It didn't even flinch, utterly indifferent to the weight, and continued to treat the steel beam like a snack, gnawing, crushing, and swallowing it piece by piece. The situation had spiraled completely out of control. Surveillance cameras in the hallway were smashed by falling debris, sparking one last time before going dark. The overhead fire sprinkler pipes, torn apart by its earlier pull, spewed not water but a thick, purplish-red smoke. The smoke quickly filled the corridor, blotting out all visibility. All I could hear were the monster's heavy footsteps through the haze, each step making the floor tremble, and the distinct clack-clack of its metal chewing growing clearer, as if right beside my ear. It hadn't gone far. I could hear it toying with the remaining metal drums by the doorway, tearing the drum walls apart like paper and casually tossing the pieces aside. The torn metal fragments clattered sharply against the floor, the sound carrying far through the smoke. I knew what it was doing. It had turned this place into its own dining room, treating the scrap like chewing gum. I clutched the few remaining magazines in my hand, but against a monster that could munch through blast walls like crackers, they were utterly useless. I glanced toward the other end of the monitoring room, where a row of spare oxygen tanks stood. I dragged them over, stacking them one by one in front of the door, my eyes fixed on the purplish-red smoke, watching the monster's shifting silhouette within. The shadow grew larger, more blurred. It was still chewing, still tearing. Each crisp sound felt like another piece of the building's skeleton being ripped away. The steel plate it had torn apart earlier now lay discarded in the doorway, blocking my only escape route. The plate had been twisted into a bizarre shape, imprinted with 4 deep claw marks that pierced clean through the metal, staring back at me like grotesque, snarling faces. Suddenly, it stopped moving. The chewing ceased. A deathly silence once again filled the space. I stared at the doorway, not daring to breathe. I knew it had found me. Within that thick smoke, a pair of senses that shouldn't exist were locking onto me. It turned at the doorway, the friction of all 4 limbs scraping against the wall sounding like a giant centipede crawling. It was waiting outside, waiting for me to step out of this small, crumbling monitoring room, or for the walls to give way under its relentless clawing. I watched the cracks in the wall widen, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. This barrier wouldn't hold much longer. Outside, it was tearing at the last cable in the hallway, the flickering light illuminating the outlines of its 4 limbs, casting huge, distorted shadows on the door. One shadow extended 4 fingers, slowly, inch by inch, digging into the door seam once more. It wasn't rushing in. Instead, it dragged its nails back and forth across the door frame, carving deep, long grooves. From each groove seeped that purple, scalding liquid, dripping down the door, blistering the monitoring room's paint and emitting a nauseating, burnt stench. This torturous rhythm made every second stretch into an eternity. It was waiting outside, waiting for me to break. The ceiling overhead groaned, its steel beams twisted like pretzels, ready to collapse at any moment. Chunks of debris rained down on us. Pinging off our helmets, mine was already dented in several places. My teammate beside me swung his gun wildly, firing blindly upward. The muzzle flashes cast a stark, ghostly light on the walls, but the bullets only sent already loose rebar flying everywhere. He kept screaming, a sound as sharp as metal scraping glass. After emptying his magazine, he clawed at the pipes on the wall, his fingers sliced open by the sharp edges. He didn't even glance at the wounds, just kept raking his bloody hands across the surface, leaving long, crimson streaks. The blast wall bulged inward from the monster's relentless pounding. The metal sheet wailed in protest, screws popping out one by one and embedding themselves in the walls like bullets. I watched as one of the creature's hands punched through the steel plate, its claws scraping against the surface with a sound even more piercing than before. The wall tore like old newspaper, smoke curling from the gashes. My teammate was still throwing himself against it, trying to shove the wall back. His whole body trembled, sweat and grime streaming into his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. Just kept mechanically kicking, his boots screeching against the floor. We couldn't stay here. The floor had grown hot and soft, purple ooze welling up through the cracks and pooling around our ankles. I looked down. My shoelaces were already charred, the acrid smell stronger than ever. I grabbed a metal panel from the floor and slammed it against the wall, trying to break open the vent. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact sent a jolt of pain through my shoulders. I couldn't feel exhaustion, couldn't stop. My mind was fixed on that vent, on prying off that cover. I dug my fingers into the wall seam and yanked, feeling a fingernail tear back, but I barely registered it, just kept tearing at that steel plate. Then the blast wall let out a deafening roar. The monster ripped the steel sheet clean off and hurled it aside. One of its arms thrust into the room, still clutching half-eaten radiation barrel lids, jagged metal fragments digging into its claws. It didn't even look at us. All 4 limbs swept through the room in a chaotic frenzy. The monitoring console was crushed into scrap with a single blow, monitors exploding, shards flying everywhere. One sliced my cheek, but I just wiped the blood away and kept working on the vent cover. I had to reach the control panel. There was an emergency cutoff switch there. Pulling it would flood the entire space with freezing gas. I watched as the monster heaved the entire console aside, digging underneath to tear out and devour the cables. I dropped my gun. It was useless now. Hoisting the cooling tank onto my back, I felt its weight press down until my bones groaned. Hugging the scorching wall, I inched forward. Sparks crackled from exposed cables, some landing on my neck and making me flinch. I bit back a cry, gritting my teeth and pressing my hand firmly against the wall. I was only 3 steps from the switch. One of the monster's arms hung less than 2 meters above me. It gripped an overhead steel beam, bending it until it hung just centimeters from my head. I could smell it, the stench of burnt rubber, metal melting in its gut. My hand reached for the lever on the wall. My feet slipped in the slime, nearly sending me tumbling into the hole the monster was clawing at. I threw my full weight onto the lever, my knees slamming into the concrete floor, pain seizing my entire body. I stared at the switchy red metal lever, rusted and weathered. I thought about pulling it down. Just one pull, and the temperature here would plummet below freezing. I gripped it firmly and yanked downward. The switch was stiff, seized up by rust. I grabbed it with both hands, braced my feet against the wall, and strained every muscle in my body. The tension made my veins feel like they were about to burst. It was moving, inching downward. Just a little more force, and it would give way. I ignored the monster behind me, tearing the room apart. Ignored the steel beams above that could collapse at any moment. My focus was locked on that switch, pouring every ounce of strength into that single red lever. I heard the grinding sound from my shoulder joints, as if my bones were about to dislocate, but I didn't let go. Once, twice, I threw my body weight against the metal rod, forcing it down bit by bit. This wasn't just a switch, it was my only way out, the only thing that could stop that monster. I could feel the lever trembling, sliding downward. Just a little more, one last push, and I could seal this entire space, trap that ravenous creature in the freezing cold. My breathing was ragged, like a bellows, forcing every bit of air from my lungs. With one final, desperate tug, the lever let out a sharp crack and began to drop. The red lever slammed all the way down. A dull rumble echoed through the hall, as if a massive iron door had shut deep underground. Before I could catch my breath, freezing nitrogen gas shot out from the ceiling nozzles like a white waterfall. The cold was so intense that the purple slime on the floor instantly froze, cracking and snapping. I crouched low, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. My clothes stiffened in an instant, clinging to me like a shell of ice. The moment the gas hit, the monster staggered. Its four arms, which had been tearing at cables, froze midair. The half-eaten radiation barrels, now brittle in the extreme cold, shattered in its grip, scattering glittering shards across the floor. It let out a roar so loud it shook the entire control room. A guttural, grinding sound like multiple heavy trucks gnashing their teeth. Instead of collapsing, the cold seemed to drive it into a frenzy. Its four arms flailed wildly, sending the remaining radiation barrels flying. The multi-ton metal container smashed into the walls, pulverizing them like tofu. It charged toward me, its body slamming into the corridor's support columns. The already battered pillars bent under the impact, and chunks of the ceiling began to collapse. Heavy stones crashed onto its back, sparking on impact, but it didn't even flinch, bulldozing through the debris toward me. I rolled aside just as one of its thick arms smashed the spot where I'd been crouching, cratering the floor. Tiles shattered, and concrete fragments stung my face. Ignoring the pain, I scrambled away. The corridor was now an icebox, every step slippery with shattered ice. I glanced back and saw the monster wedged in the hallway. Its massive frame moved sluggishly in the cold, its four arms jammed against the walls, which groaned ominously under the strain. One of its hands still clawed at the ground, scraping deep grooves into the concrete and sending sparks flying. Its mouth hung open, its serrated teeth coated in frost, and it roared at me, each cry blasting clouds of white vapor. It struggled to free itself from the narrow passage, tearing chunks out of the walls with every heave. The corridor wall crumbled like a broken cookie under its brute force. I reached the ventilation door at the far end, the final barrier. Frantically, I twisted the frozen circular wheel. My hand stuck to the icy metal, the skin peeling as I forced it to turn. The door inched open. Behind me, the monster had demolished the hallway wall entirely. Its hulking body squeezed into the main hall like a tank, sending rubble flying in all directions. It saw me. Its four arms suddenly pushed off the ground, and its entire body leaped out from the passageway. It landed a few meters behind me, the impact shaking the ground so violently that I nearly lost my balance. I forced the heavy door open and slipped inside sideways. The creature lunged with terrifying speed. The moment I turned around, its massive claw slammed into the doorframe. The frame crumpled instantly, and the steel door was gouged with 4 deep indentations from its fingers. One of its hands was now trapped in the door gap, still frantically trying to force its way in. I grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and swung it down hard on the creature's hand. The extinguisher was incredibly heavy, and I put all my strength into the blow, aiming for its knuckles. The impact echoed loudly, like striking stone. Instead of retracting its hand, the creature gripped even tighter. Another one of its hands smashed into the thick iron door, denting it inward. The lock mechanism let out one last sharp, cracking sound as the entire door began to bulge outward. I had no choice but to retreat until my back hit the corner of the room. Its 4 hands clawed wildly at the door, sending shredded fragments of metal flying through the air like blades. Every piece that struck the wall left a deep gash. It was tearing the door apart. As a corner of the metal door was ripped away, I caught a glimpse of its face expressionless, with several glowing, frost-rimmed hollows. Outside, it was wrenching the torn steel plate apart with brute force, the screech of twisting metal sending chills down my spine. One of its hands was now fully inside the room. The claw swiped through the air, snatching a cooling canister I had dropped earlier. It crushed the canister like a toy, the metal groaning and twisting before it burst, spraying liquid nitrogen everywhere. The room's temperature plummeted instantly, coating the walls in a thick layer of frost and freezing the sparking wires into silence. Shrouded in the white mist, the creature swung its 4 arms, each swipe tearing chunks of concrete from the ceiling. I watched, knowing it couldn't fully emerge yet, but also aware that it wouldn't stop. It dismantled the door completely, reducing it to a pile of shredded metal. Now the door was no longer an obstacle, just a heap of half-devoured scrap. It stepped onto the wreckage, squeezing its bulk into the room. Its 4 arms braced against the floor, lifting its massive frame upright. The enormous body filled the small space, its bony spine scraping against the ceiling with a grating sound. Once steady, it stretched all 4 arms toward me. The movement was too fast to follow, only gray blurs flickered before my eyes. I dodged desperately, but the room was too confined to escape. One of its claws grazed my shoulder, tearing through the protective suit. An icy, sharp pain shot from my shoulder down to my back. It showed no sign of stopping. It snatched a nearby table and hurled it against the wall, cracking the entire surface. Piece by piece, it dismantled and crushed everything in the room. With each destruction, it paused to shovel the debris into its mouth, devouring the room like a massive metal cake. I watched as the cracks in the walls widened, and the ceiling beams began to sway precariously. The monster was now just steps away, its 4 arms swinging through the air, each strike pounding the ground with deafening force. It was no longer just a creature. It was a machine grinding the entire base into dust. Purple fluid dripped from its body, sizzling against the concrete floor and filling the room with acrid smoke that stung my eyes and choked my lungs. I watched as it continued to destroy, to consume, to reduce everything to rubble with raw force. Every roar reverberated in my chest, my ears ringing with the sound of twisting metal. There was no escape. The floor was littered with shredded metal and shattered concrete. Amid the wreckage, it advanced step by step, its claws scraping against the ground with an even sharper screech. I knew this was the end. It had flattened the entire room walls, floor, ceiling, all reduced to debris under the relentless destruction of its hands. It kept tearing, kept chewing, its frenzy as if it intended to swallow the entire underground world. When it shredded the last support beam, the roof collapsed in an instant. The roof collapsed, and huge chunks of concrete crashed to the ground, kicking up dust so thick I could barely breathe. I scrambled out of the rubble on all 4s. The wound on my shoulder burned with a searing pain. My protective suit was torn wide open, and the skin around the injury had taken on a faint purple hue, with wisps of white smoke still rising from the edges. There was no sign of it healing. I glanced down and saw a tiny metal shard lodged in the wound, a fragment that had flown off when the creature tore through the door earlier. It was still embedded deep, stabbing sharply with every movement. I groped for the door handle and yanked it hard. A sliver of light from the hallway seeped through the crack. The creature was trapped under the collapsed roof, its 4 arms flailing wildly, its nails digging desperately into the floor, leaving deep white scratches. One of its nails had broken off, lying near my feet, its edge as sharp as a paper cutter, coated with that purple slime that was slowly eating away at the floor, leaving behind small, corroded pits. All the metal drums in the hallway were gone, replaced by a mound of chewed-up metallic debris that still emitted faint crunching sounds, as if the chewing hadn't quite finished. I didn't look back, just dragged my injured shoulder along as I made my way toward the emergency exit. My boots crunched softly on the scattered metal fragments. The door to the evacuation passage was open. I paused at the threshold and took one last look behind me. The trapped creature was still moving, its arms clawing frantically at the rubble, prying up floor tiles one by one. The once tightly sealed lead door now looked as if it had been mauled by some monstrous beast pockmarked with holes, its edges twisted beyond recognition. I placed my hand on the push bar of the emergency exit, shoved the door open, and a rush of cold air flooded in. Too exhausted to spare another glance, I turned and stepped out into the wind. In every footprint I left behind, traces of that glowing purple liquid shimmered faintly.